So today's broadcast is sponsored by Rabbi Avrami Friedberg, to thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for her son becoming a chassan, and it should be a schus for all of us to get out of this matzav in the best way possible. And he had a good nusach. Remember what his nusach is? We have to quote his exact nusach. Let me bring it up. The nusach is Bekirvas Kabbalas Hatera Besimcha Upnimius. Okay. Good morning, everybody. We'll get started. So I'm just going to quickly run through what we did yesterday. So we learned a little bit about Shtaris. Let's see where we were up to. Yeah, we learned about water, how much water you need, which is just enough to mix with powder to make that ointment. And then we learned about other mashkim revius, about dam. We learned about the different remedies that you can use dam for, such as to take care of infections or problems in your eyes, cataracts. And then we learned the halacha that if someone is machshav a smaller shear than what's typical, if it's his talmud who is moving it, then he's chayiv, then the talmud would be chayiv, and according to Shimon ben Elazar, anybody else who moved it would be chayiv. And then we spoke about shoifchin, dirty water, what it could be used for, and we said it's used for gibel. And then we got into the Mishnah that discusses other things like strings and pieces of leather and miscellaneous objects. So we are up to about 8 lines down from the top of Ein Chesed Aleph. No, I'm sorry, Ein Tesem Aleph. I'm sorry. So yesterday we looked about that. There's Ein Tesem Aleph. Sorry. Let me get to the place. So we're about 5-6 lines down on Ein Tesem Aleph, or how big does or have to be? How big does a piece of leather need to be mechuyev? Zok tehela gemar, or kedei lasos kameo is what the Mishnah said. So boy minei Rava Meir of Nachman. Rava asked a shaila from Rav Nachman. Hamoitzi or, if you carry or out of from Shusha Yach to Shusha Rabbim, become. And of course that's our Mishnah. So that wasn't really Rava's point. That was just as a springboard to start off his series of questions that started with the question that the Mishnah already clarifies. Omer lekeditnan, exactly like what it says in the Mishnah. Or kedelasos kameya. If you have a piece of or that's big enough to make a kameya, and you walked out with it, there's a chiyuv chatas. So he asked him, Hama bekamo. Let's take a pause from Hilchos Haitzah, and let's look. We know being ma'abed or, doing the tanning process for or, is also a chiyuv chatas, is also a malacha. How much or must one be ma'abed in order to be mechuyev chatas? It doesn't make a difference. It's the same shear. If he's ma'abed enough or to make a kameya, that's going to be chayiv. Le'abloi bekama. What if he had hide that was not yet tanned, it wasn't yet processed, he's planning to process it, but he has not yet processed it, so it's still in a raw state, and I'm walking out with it, on Shabbos, how much of it would be a dover choshev that you would be mechuyev chatos? The same shear, kameya. Kameya is across the board, whether it's processed, whether it's unprocessed. When we're not tamer, and from where do I get this concept that even something that's unprocessed has the same level of cheshivas as something that's processed, and you don't need more. It's rather the same small amount that a processed piece would be to be mechuyev. That same small amount would also be even if it's unprocessed. Kedetnan hamalabin, and this goes back to the series of malachas done in preparing wool. Hamalabin, you wash the wool, you whiten it. From you comb it to make it into strands from just a bump, from just a big bush, batzeveya, and then you dye it, batoiva, and then you spin it. So all of these malachis, how much of these malachis do you need to do to be mechuyev achatos? Shiurei kamolei roichev hasid kafel. It's the distance from the finger, the pointing finger, to the amo finger, which is the longest finger. This distance here is about 2.5, 3 inches times 2. So if you spun a thread about 6 inches long, or if you whitened or combed or dyed enough wool that you can make out of it a 6-inch piece of thread, then there's a chiyuv chatas. But if you weave, then it has to be, we said when you weave, you have to take the spool of weft and throw it back and forth in between the threads twice. How wide does the beged have to be? That beged only has to be about 3 inches wide, which is the distance between your pointing finger and your middle finger. But whatever it is, you see, malabin is the same 6 inches as toiva. So what you see from here is alma kivan l'tfia koi shiur ketvi. Since all these things are leading up to the malach of spinning, they all have the same shear. Even though you might say that since malabin is in a much rougher stage, maybe for it to be a significant malacha, you would have to do malabin on more wool than what you have to do tfiyah on. But that's not what the Brisa says. The Brisa says they all have the same shear. So you see, no matter what part of development, what stage in the process it's in, it still has the same amount that makes it a davar choshev. So to our or, even though you have not yet processed it, the same shear to make a kameya will still be choshev to generate or to trigger an iser haitzah. Alma kivud l'tfiyah kai shear ktavi hachanami kivud l'avdei kai. Since you are planning to process this leather, shiurei kam ubed, the same shear that I'm ubed would be also with, which is enough to make a kameya out of. That would be the shear of even a piece of leather that has not yet been processed. Now, what about vishaloi la'avdei? What if you had no intention of processing it? You have wool that's not in the pipeline. I'm sorry, you have leather that's not in the pipeline, and you have no intention of processing it. How much of that would you have to carry out to be over an issue? Again, loishna. It's the same shear of the amount of leather it would take to wrap a kameya. In fact, the Gemara shani bein mu'ubed l'shein mu'ubed. Are you suggesting, going back not to what we just said, but going back earlier, are you saying that it doesn't make a difference if it's mu'ubed or not mu'ubed? Either way, it has the same shear. I'm going to show you examples of cases that we actually learned already, some of them. I'm going to show you examples of cases where the fact that it's in a rougher stage, and it's a more premature stage, actually mandates that you need a bigger portion to be able to be over this yitzir. I saw. And what's one example that we did not learn yet? Is a moiti samodim shruyin kidelet tzvaya behem. You have ready-made dye. You have ready-made dye. So you have a pot of ready-made dye. It's ready to dye. How much dye do you need in order that the dye should be significant enough that if you carry it from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabin, you should be mechuyev achatos? It's just enough kidelet tzvaya behem dugma. It's enough if you're just going to dye a little swath of material that you would use as a sample. In the old days, my grandfather told me that he went into the shmata business. Why did he go into the shmata business? He said the same reason why a lot of Eden went into the shmata business. Because we came from Europe, we didn't speak a word of English. We used to take a whole bunch of pieces of cloth that were like 1 inch square, staple it on to a piece of cardboard, and write the price. And we didn't have to talk. All we did was we pointed. And that's how we were able to sell our shmatas, even though we didn't speak English. So that little square of material, the amount of dye that you would need to dye that little square, that's the amount of dye that's choshev, that if you carry that dye out, you'd be mechuyev. Or le'ira, the same amount of dye that it would take to dye that little square of material is also the size of material. That same size material is the size material that you would stick into the spool. Now, if you remember, the weft thread was kept on a spool. They would pass the spool back and forth to weave. Now that spool you don't want it to unravel. You want it to be taut, so that the thread should be tight when you throw it across. So what they would do is they take a shmata, squish it up, and stip it into the hole where the thread came out of, so that in order for the thread to come out, you'd have to pull on it. It wouldn't just come out loosely, and this way, when they were unraveling that thread, as they needed it, it would stay snug. So I'll call upon them. So that's how much you need. That's how much you need if you have the actual dye. But the ilu b'samanim she'ein shurim. But if you just have the vegetables or the roots or the spices or whatever these things are that you cook in water to create the dye, if you just have those raw materials, tanan, you need to have a lot more than the amount to make this little bit of dye. Rather, it says klipe agoizim or klipe remoinim, stis upua. These are all different things that were used to make dye. How much of those are considered significant to trigger an Isser Hitzah? To make a piece of material that would cover the lady's kerchief. That was considerably larger than the dugma above. So you see the fact that it wasn't as processed, it's not yet a dye, makes it less choshev, and because of that you need to have more of it in order to trigger an Isser Hitzah. So how could you say that leather that's not yet processed will have the same small shear as leather that is processed? So the Gemara, really, it is just as chashuv. But by the simonim, it's a separate story. Even though a little bit of dye is chashuv, but nobody's going to bother going through the process of preparing so little dye. Once someone's preparing a batch of dye, he's going to prepare a batch that's a little bit bigger, enough to dye a beged, not a small little inch by inch piece of cloth. So that's why if you don't have the dye yet, the dye itself will be chashuv because it could dye a small piece of cloth. But you don't have the dye yet, you only have the raw materials. I wouldn't do anything with raw materials that couldn't produce at least a larger portion of dye. How about seeds that you want to plant in a garden? The mekamed is a rinu. Before you plant them, if you have loose seeds, how many loose seeds does it take to create a davar choshev, to trigger an Isser Hitzah? Tanan, we learned, so Gina, either pachash mikagregish, you need to have a handful of seeds, at least just smaller than the size of a gregish, which will be a whole bunch of seeds. And every Yehuda and Meseris machrin is chamisha. Even if you are holding 5 individual seeds, that's enough to trigger an Isser. The ilu bosud is a rinu, but once you have planted already, Tanan, we learned, zevel v'choil hadak, carrying zevel, it's like fertilizer, v'choil hadak, and thin sand. How much would you have to carry? Kedei lezabel boy kelach shel kruv. All you would need is enough to fertilize one plant. So you see, one plant is choshev. So you see that one plant is choshev when it's more in progress, it's already growing. But beforehand, when you only have seeds, you need 5. Again, it's a kasha. How could you say by leather the unprocessed should be the same as the processed? It's to be mezabel a crest plant. So Gemara law, again the same svara. Amar Papa, hadazriya, hadaloizriya. If it's already planted, sure, it's a davar choshev, and really only one is a davar choshev. So why, before you plant, you have to have at least 5? No one's going to trouble himself to plant one seed. Anybody who goes out to plant is going to plant a minimum of 5 seeds. And therefore, when it's only in the seed form, you need 5 to be a davar choshev. But really, other than these special reasons that a person wouldn't want to plant for smaller things, the fact that it's in an earlier stage of development, that in and of itself is not a reason to say that the shear should be smaller. If we're talking about planting seeds, yesterday was the yahrzeit of Reb Meir Farmishlan. He was a big Rebbe. And there's a story with Reb Meir Farmishlan. He was a big Baal Moifis. He had a nephew who was Reb Matcha from Nadvorna. Reb Matcha from Nadvorna, there was a time where there was also a Magefa. They had epidemics in those days as well. And that was right before Sukkot. And he put up a sukkah. And the mayor of the city went around, and I guess he didn't want he wanted social distancing. He didn't want people together. And he said, take that down. And he sent the bylaw officers They told Matcham to take it down, and he said, he did, I'm not taking it down. In the midst of sukkah. So the mayor himself came out to the sukkah. De Blasio himself came to Williamsburg. He came to that sukkah, and he said, tear that sukkah down. So Matcham and the said, sorry, man, I can't. I mean, give me a week, but I'm not taking it down now. So he said, I said, take it down now. So Reb Meir Farmishlan said, do you know who I am? I'm sorry, Matcham and said, do you know who I am? He says, I don't care who you are. He says, I am the nephew of Reb Meir and Farmishlan. So he says, I don't care if you're Santa Claus's nephew. Take the sukkah down, take it down now. So Matcham and says, let me tell you a story. About 50 years ago, there was a priest, and the priest had 10 wonderful sons, and he also had a beautiful orchard. And one day he decided that he wants to have beautiful flowers, so he knocked down a fruit tree, and he planted beautiful flowers. And after that happened, his children started dying, one after the other, and he went to doctors and kishifmachers, and he went everywhere, and nothing helped. And when his last son, his 10th son, was sick, he was desperate, didn't know what to do. So someone said, listen, try the Jews. Go to Reb Meir Farmishlan. We heard he's a big wonder rabbi. Go to him. Maybe he'll be able to do something for you. So he says, but they're like the opposite, they're the other team. He says, listen, your son's on the line. You got to put away your differences. Now it's time. Now it's time for the rubber to hit the road. So
I hear Yosy Simon, the Kishifmachers are not on the other team. Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Okay, thank you. So he went to Reb Meir Farmishlan, and the Meir said, the reason why this is happening to you is you cut down the fruit tree, so you cut down the Rebbeinu Shalom's fruits, and Hashem is destroying your fruits. But if you want me to give you a bracha that your son should survive, if you promise that you and your children, your grandchildren will never, ever, ever, ever harass Yidden, then I give you a bracha, he'll survive. This is the story that Reb Matcham and Advarna told over to this mayor. This mayor says, now that you mentioned it, that Sarah you're talking about, that priest you were talking about, he was my father. I was the 10th son. Keep your sukkah. I'll come back another day. Anyway, so Zot Ahela Gemara weiter. V'harei tit, and this we learned already. This is the sugi that we did learn already. But tit, this is an example that we learned. The makama the before you put it together and you knead it and you create the actual tit. Tanya moedim chacham Rab Shimon b'motzi shayfrin v'shesharabim sheshiyur b'revius. Before you make tit, you have to make the water that you would mix in with the sand to make the tit. You need to have water that was revius, which would make a significant amount of tit when you mixed it with the appropriate amount of sand. And the Gemara asked, and we learned this Gemara already, what is Shayfchin good for? But after you already have tit, if you have tit, how much tit does it take to create an Israel? Tanya tit k'dei ben pikur, just to plug the hole, the cover of a small jug, which is way less than the amount of tit that you would make with a revius of water. Kum techois, the fact that we're in an earlier stage of production, we're still at the ingredient stage, by tit, you see that in order to be a davar chashuv, you have to have a lot more of it than the amount that you would need later on once the tit is formed. So tomorrow, again, the same reason that we said 3 times already, we'll say again. No one's going to be busy making tit to make a tiny little bit of it. Once they make it, the minimum batch size is a revius of water with whatever the appropriate cement mix is. Tashma. There's 3 types of hides, meaning 3 levels of production. Matzah, there's a hide that's we call it matzah. The chipa, there's a hide that's further progressed along its tanning stage. It's called chipa. And then the 3rd level is diphthera. So what are these 3 stages? Matzah kimashmoy, the loy maliach, the loy kamiach, the loy ofetz. In the tanning process, we learned first they salt it and they let it sit in salt for a while, and then after they take the salt off, they put on it flour, and they rub it with flour, which cleans it or does something to it, And then afterwards they smear it with something called a gal nut. I don't know what type of nut this is, but it's a gal nut. That I guess the chemicals in the nut helped process these leathers. So if it's called matzah, it wasn't even salted yet. Now they actually bring a raya lalocha from here. When you make matzah, the matzah that we eat on Pesach, are you allowed to put salt into the matzah? So they bring a raya from here that you cannot, because the fact that we refer to oiris that have no salt as matzah indicates that the definition of matzah is something that doesn't even have salt. And in fact, the mechaber paskins that matzah does not have salt. And the mechaber says that chiluk shouldn't have salt, and the Ramah says even b'di'evet, if there's salt in the matzah, you're not yotzer with that matzah.
But Yosy Simon, the matzah is going to have flour. It's still called matzah.
I hear it. Good point. Good point. Very good. Okay. Zok to Gemara weiter. So matzah mashmoid lemelichud lekamiach udaloyafitz. The chamesh yiroi, how much hide that's not processed at all is enough hide to create an Israel tzah. Tani Rab Shmuel bar Agudah, kedei lotzer boy mishkoilas katana. It would be the weights that they used to have. They used to have weights that they would measure things that they were selling, and it would be a counterweight. But it was made out of lead most of the times. And lead, if you keep on handling it, eventually it starts to wear down, and it would weigh less. So because of that, they put the weight into a leather pouch to protect it from wearing down. So if you had a piece of leather that was big enough to wrap a weight in, which was a pretty decent size of leather, pretty decent sized piece of leather, then that leather you wouldn't be able to carry out. And what type of leather are we talking about? A leather that has no salting, nothing. It's raw. The hammer, and how much is this shear that you need to, how much is this small weight that we're talking about? What weight do we mean when we say that the leather has to be big enough to wrap this way? Or the pimbedisa. It was a weight of it was a 1/16 of a litra in pimbedisa. So that's the first level. The first level, you need a pretty big size. Chipa, once your leather is a little bit more processed, the malich v'loy kamiach v'loy afetz. It is already salted, but it wasn't yet mixed with dough, with flour, and it didn't have the galnut smear yet. The chamesh yiroi, that's a little bit more along the way. Kitnan or kedei lasus kameya. That's a smaller piece. And divdura, it's the malich v'kamiach v'loy afetz v'chamesh yiroi kedei lichtoi v'lovas aget. And Rashi learns that's even smaller than the first two. So you see, the further along in the process it goes, the smaller the shear. So how could you say before you ma'abed it, it's the same shear? Katani mias kedei lotzer by mishkoilas katana, when it's unworked, which is a lot more than the shear of kameya. So how could the Gemara say earlier that even if it's not worked out, it's the same shear? He said even if it's not worked out. So how could you say that it's the same shear as kameya? Well, here you see, in fact, if it's not worked out, you have to have a bigger piece. So the level of prematurity that the Bryce is referring to when it said is when it's still soft. It was cooked. Rashi b'shul lach. If it's still moist, in the same condition as it was when you actually skin the animal, it's called bishula. It's like soft and losh and bishul shulach. It's moist. It's not even ready to even start the process. It's not even ready for the salting process. That's so premature that take does need a bigger shear. Aval yavish, but once it's dry and you're right before the salting process, but you haven't started, chazil ibud. So even if you didn't even start the tanning process, it would still have the same shear, and that is to make a kameya. But if it's not even ready to be tanned yet, it's still wet and soft and fresh because it just came off the animal, that's so far removed from the tanning process. In order for it to have any chashivas, it has to be big enough to wrap a weight in. First, the Gemara, I'll bring you another ride that there's a difference. But now, beged shloisha. In order for a beged, like Tzemer and Pishtim, to be Tumas Medris, is if it's 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim. Medris. Hasak, if it's a sackcloth, dalet al dalet, it has to be a little bit bigger. Ha'or has to be hay al hay. Mapits, a mat made out of reeds, vav vav vav. And here's the clincher. Bein lemedris, sai letuma, bein lemeis, sai for tumas meis. The Tani Allah, we know the brayso that said regarding the size of 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim for or, that a beged vasak va'or kishir letuma kach shir lohitzah. So you see that for or, you need a much bigger shear. It has to be 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim. Not a little bit to make a kameya, and surely not a tiny little bit to wrap a weight. It would have to be, I'm sure, not a little bit to wrap a weight, and surely not a tiny little bit to wrap a kameya, to make a kameya out of. Rather, you need a huge piece, which is 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim. So how do you explain that? That's kertuvla. Kertuvla means that you cooked it in hot water, umiskash, and you hardened it, because there you're preparing it to make it into a seat, into a stand to stand on. Leishavalam, ulachasas dluvkoy shekarin pushtivile, umitois lasashulchan. There you actually took a whole different route. You weren't preparing it to be leather like for a shoe. You took it to a different route, which is you wanted to make it into a hard tabletop. That type of leather has a whole different set of rules, and that leather, of course, requires a much bigger shear, 5 by 5. So now we know, depending on what process, on what stage you're in, if the leather is so premature that it's still soft, then you need a shear of kedei lacher by mishkalas katana. But once it's ready to be tanned, then from there straight through, it's just a shear of a kameya. And if you're using the leather as a tabletop and you cooked it to harden it, then you need a much bigger shear. You need 5 tvachim by 5 tvachim. Zok to Gemara Vayter. Now we're going to get into the hilchos of the cloth for a mezuzah, for tefillin, and for sefer Torah. So our Mishnah said, how much cloth do you need? Kedei lichtoi v'lov parsha katana, in order to write a small parsha on it. We're manufacturing Gemara. Klaf viduch sustus, and Tosfos says the word duch sustus comes from sustus means the meat of an animal, and duch means in the place of the meat of an animal, and that means Tosfos tells us that the cloth, which is the hide of the animal, you were actually able to split into 2 layers. The outer layer closer to the fur was called the cloth. The inner layer that would be on the meat of the animal, that would touch the meat of the animal, was called the duch sustus. Why? Because sustus stands for meat, and duch means upon. Duch sustus, the part of the hide, the layer of the hide that's right upon the meat of the animal. So what is the shear for that? Kedei lichtoi v'lov mezuzah. A mezuzah is more than the parsha of Shema, the parsha Ketana of Shema, the Mishnah says. A mezuzah has 2 parshas in it. So you see a stira, because the brayso says it has to be more. So tomorrow, my mezuzah shebet tefillin. Mezuzah means the scroll. The scroll that's in the tefillin, which is only the parsha of Shema, is good enough. So I just want to stop a second, because we do have a couple of minutes, at 7:46, to just understand how hide is made. So I wanted to share with you a very short video that tells us how hide is made, and it'll help us understand this a little bit better. If I could find the right
You need
video.
help in setting up the projector?
No, we got it already. I just have to see which one it is that we're looking for. Okay, I believe it's over here. Let's see what we have over here. Let me see if I have it somewhere else on the screen, because I have it prepared, but now I don't see it. Let's see. Might be this.
I want to see the one in the corner.
1 second. I started playing it, so I hope it comes up on history. Oh, here it is.
You have to share.
I didn't share the sound. I'm sorry. I have to share the sound. I apologize. Let me just get to it. I'll stop the share and I'll do it again. here we go. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
To meet Wim Vischer, one of the few people
every single skin to make them good enough for parchment. The big problem with parchment compared with leather is that there's no dye, no printing, so you see the actual skin when it's finished and you write on it. And so any blemishes also show up.
So what's the next stage of the process?
Well, we've got to start cleaning the skins up, getting rid of the salt, and I've got some pretty primitive washing machines here to show you. I'll just turn it off. This skin's been in here for quite a few days.
It feels very smooth on the skin.
Yeah, so you're left there with the skin surface completely undamaged, which will be the surface of the parchment.
Yeah.
So the next stage is...
A laborious and skillful process.
It is, but it's quite simple. You want to have a go?
I'd love to, yeah.
It's like a punching motion, so you punch at the flesh,
Yeah.
so you're trying to raise the flesh up.
Yeah, brilliant, okay. I'm not going to sort of cut through here, am I?
No, this will take quite a lot of work.
Right, okay. Right, so I punch into it.
That's it, you want slightly shorter movements.
So final is as clean as the side that we were looking at.
It's really nice to hold it in the hands.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back there. Let's get my camera back on here. So as you can see over there, you don't see them separate the skin into two layers to have the inner layer as a duchtustus and the chsustus and the outer layer as the klaf. But in the olden days they must have, but they must have stopped a while ago because Toysus already talks about the klaf that we have nowadays is considered klaf, not duchtustus. So it seems like a long time ago they already stopped splitting that layer in half, and they just had the whole thing together, which Toysus says has the din of klaf. And we'll see how that works out because we're going to see what could be written on klaf and what cannot. So let's have a look. Ramini, klaf v'duch sustos. How much of that you have to have? Could they lift of mezuzah? So to my mind, mezuzah shabbat tefillin. It really means the parsha of tefillin, which is the parsha of Krishma. Correct the Gemara. The korah lahula tefillin mezuzah. Are you telling me that the Gemara, the Mishnah, refer to tefillin using the word mezuzah? So Gemara in, as a matter of fact, yes. But Tanya we learned, Ritzuah is tefillin, im tefillin metamas yadayim. There's a gzera d'Rabbanan that the svarim are metamas yadayim because they didn't want mice getting near truma. They didn't want people storing their truma near the kisvei kodesh. So they said that they're tamei. So Ritzuah is tefillin, im tefillin metamas yadayim. If you touch the Ritzuah that are connected to tefillin, you become tamei. You cannot touch truma. Bifnei atzman by themselves. I'm sorry, bifnei atzman, but the Ritzuahs by themselves. If the Ritzuahs are not connected to the tefillin, any metamas yadayim, because it's just the bottom. Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Shimon Hanegeh Ritzuah tar. Even if the Ritzuah is connected to the tefillin, touching the Ritzuah will not be tamei you. You have to touch. You have to touch the box of the tefillin. Reb Zakkai Mishmoy Omer, tar it's tar achiyiga b'mezuzah atzma, until you touch the scroll itself. So you see that the parshas in the tefillin are referred to as mezuzah. Fact the Gemara, the seifa of this brisa of klaf mezuzah, the seifa of this brisa says klaf kedei lichtov olav parsha k'tana tefillin shishma Yisrael. So that's talking about tefillin. It must be the ratio. This part must have been talking about the mezuzah atzmaskina. So it must be talking about a mezuzah. The lichav of mezuzah. Zok to Gemara. You have to split it. You have to say as follows.
Yes, Steve. Sorry. I have a question.
Sure.
I didn't catch the connection between tamei and between the amount that becomes tamei to what we're talking about and how much you carry.
The relevance of the lumbus of the brisa is not relevant at all. It's only from the fact that Reb Zakkai said that if you touch tefillin, your tar mezuzah atzma, until you touch the parshas inside the tefillin, and it's referring to the parshas inside the tefillin with the word mezuzah. So all we're proving is that Reb Zakkai referred to the parshas inside the tefillin with the word mezuzah. So you see that sometimes you can call tefillin mezuzah.
And it's all the parshas? Is it referring to all of them or just one? This is where we
He's just
cover
saying, if you
one.
touch any one, if you touched any one of the parshiyos, you become tummy.
Call them mezuzah. Okay, thank you.
My pleasure. More about Mikatani Seifa. When it says in the Seifa, Klaf, Kidei Lichta Vala Pasha Katana Shabbatfilin, Shishma Yisrael, Nuchal the Resha, must be the Resha, was B'mezuzah Atzma Skinan. We're speaking about a mezuzah. Zaktimor Hachi Katani. So the problem is, if we're speaking about mezuzah, then it's a stira, because that tells you that for Klaf you need a bigger piece that you could print, that you could write a whole mezuzah on, not just a Pasha Film. So Hachi Katani depends what part of the Klaf you're talking about. Klaf with the chtustus, they're two separate things. Klaf is the outer layer of skin, the is the outer layer of skin, and the chtustus is the inner layer of skin. Shiur and bekama. What is the shear for each of these two separate items? The chsustus, the shear for the chsustus is kedei lichtei v'lav mezuzah, because mezuzahs are normally written on the chsustus, on the inner skin. But klaf, which is the outer skin, kedei lichtei v'lav parsha ketana shebetfilin shishma Yisrael, because that would be used for tefillin. So right now, what we've learned is the duchsustos is for mezuzah only, and klaf is for tefillin only. So if you would write a mezuzah on duchsustos, it would be possible. If you would write a mezuzah on klaf, it would be possible. And therefore, when you're looking at klaf, you look at one parsha of tefillin, and that would be enough to give the klaf chashivas. But when you look at duchsustos, that's only good for mezuzah, you'd have to be able to write a mezuzah on it, otherwise it wouldn't be a davar choshev.
Yes, why does the Gemara keep referring to mezuzah, which is shehi Shema Yisrael, but tefillin doesn't have Shema Yisrael in it? I'm sorry, the other way around. They keep saying that tefillin shehi Shema Yisrael. They keep repeating that. Mezuzah has
because there's four parshas in the mezuzah. The smallest one. There's four parshas in tefillin. There's four parshas in tefillin. The smallest of the four parshas is the parsha of Shema. So a piece of cloth that's considered choshev is a piece of cloth that's big enough to write the smallest parsha of the four parshas of the tefillin. But a mezuzah, you don't have individual parshas. A mezuzah is the parsha of Shema, and the other parsha, I don't remember which one it is. It's together in one scroll. So therefore, in order for the chsustus to be chashiv, you'd have to be able to write a full mezuzah on it. But in order for klaf to be important, you'd only have to write one of the four parshas, like in the Shorosh, where they're kept separately.
Got it.
So now I just want to point out, if you have a sheet of paper called klaf, which is the outer skin, you know it has two sides to it. It has the side that faces the hair, and it has the side that faces the inside. We're going to learn that the side of the cloth that you're supposed to write the tefillin on is the side that faces the inside. And the side of the cloth, or the chsustus, that you write the mezuzah on, is going to be the outer side, the outer edge. So in either case, you want the part that's skin to skin, not the side on the outside to touch the hair, and not the side on the inside to touch the meat. That's what we're going to see soon. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Amarav, duchsustus harehi klaf. Rav said halacha that duchsustus is just like klaf. And what do you learn from there? Ma klaf. We're soon going to see at the end of the Gemara that these are not Rav's words. These are what the Gemara is deducing, is understanding from Rav's words. Ma klaf, koshvin olav tefillin. Just like you could write tefillin on klaf, af duchsustus, koshvin olav tefillin, you could write tefillin on duchsustus. Tanan we learned. Klaf in our Mishnah, kedei lichtoiv parshak tana shebetfillin shishma Yisrael. Klafin duchsustus loy. It's dafke a klaf, such a small piece is good, but the chsustus would need a bigger piece. But the problem is, if according to Rav, you can write tefillin on the chsustus as well, so then the shear for the chsustus should also be the shear that you could just write one parsha of tefillin upon, because it's kosher for tefillin according to what we're quoting from Rav. So tomorrow the mitzvah, Rav was saying b'di'evet halacha l'maisa, if you wrote tefillin on the chsustus, it would be kosher. But that's not really the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to write tefillin on cloth. And because of that, people in their minds only use cloth for tefillin and use the chsustus for mezuzahs only. So therefore, they're not going to be machshiv, a piece of the chsustus, if you could write tefillin on it, because they would never use it for that. They would only be machshav a piece of d'chsustus if it was big enough to write a mezuzah on it. Toshma, we learned in another brayso. Halacha l'Moshe Messinai, that tefillin is ala klaf, mezuzah is al the d'chsustus. Klaf, where do you write the tefillin on the klaf? What side of the klaf? B'makom basar. I'm sorry, that's wrong. Klaf b'makom basar. Klaf is the layer of skin that would be on the outer side, which would be, no, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up and I apologize. Klaf is the outer layer of skin. On what side of the outer layer of skin do you actually write the words of the tefillin? B'makom basar, on the inner surface of that outer skin. D'chsustus, the inner layer of skin, where you're writing the mezuzah, b'makom seir, you write it on the outside, the place closest to the hair, which is the outer surface. So basically, you have the two pieces of skin that are together, and it's those two inner surfaces that you use. So it's the inner surface of the klaf for tefillin, and it's the outer surface of the d'chsustus for mezuzah. So again, you see clearly that tefillin could only be written on klaf, and mezuzah could only be written on d'chsustus. So the Gemara again, lemitzvah. That's only lemitzvah, but avada, b'di'eved, you could even write tefillin on d'chsustus. In fact, the Gemara, how could you say that b'di'eved you could write tefillin on d'chsustus, but Tanya shina pasel? It says if you changed, meaning if you swapped, if you wrote mezuzah on klaf and you wrote tefillin on d'chsustus, it would be pasel. So Gemara, no, on mezuzah. When it said shina pasel, it's not referring to tefillin that you wrote on d'chsustus. It's only referring to mezuzahs that you wrote on the klaf would be pasel. Thank you, Ami. So it's referring to two cases. So it must be saying if you wrote the mezuzah on klaf and if you wrote the tefillin on d'chsustus, it would be pasel. So that's Shver on Rav, who says you could write tefillin on d'chsustus. So tomorrow, no, idividi mezuzah. When it says shina b'zeh b'zeh, it's not talking about tefillin at all. It's talking exclusively about mezuzah. But there's two different things that you could have done wrong, even within the mezuzah itself. And what is that? One thing that you could do wrong with a mezuzah is not write it on the d'chsustus, but write it on the klaf. B'makom seir, even if it's on the outside surface, and kol shekain on the inside surface. Inami, but another thing that you could do wrong with the mezuzah is write it on the d'chsustus. You're writing it on the right side, but b'makom basar, but you wrote it on the inner surface. So if you wrote mezuzah on the inner surface of the d'chsustus or on either surface of the klaf, it would be pasel. But a mezuzah, but tefillin, maybe we're not talking about tefillin, and maybe tefillin that you wrote on the d'chsustus would also be kosher. So that's one option to for the kasha on Ra from this price. Or you could say that really shina bazo bazar means if you wrote the tefillin under the d'chsustus, it would be pasel, and that would not be consistent with Rav. But Tanoi, it's a machlokes Tanoi, and there's a Tana who argues on this and holds that you could write the tefillin b'di'eved under the d'chsustus, just like Rav holds. The Tanya shina bazeh bazeh pasel. But Rav Acha machshir mishum Rav Acha bar Chanina v'armilo mishum Rav Yaakov bar Chanina. There are people who hold that, in fact, if you wrote the tefillin on the d'chsustus, it would be kosher, and that's what Rav holds like. Rav Papa Omar Rav Damar Katan Dvei Menashe. He's saying like Tana Dvei Menashe. The Tana Dvei Menashe kasva al nior al matlis psula. If you wrote it on a standard piece of paper or on a shmata, it would be possible. But if you wrote it ala klaf, ala gvil, ala d'chsustus ksheira. Klaf is the outer skin, d'chsustus is the inner skin, and gvil is if you didn't take it apart and they're both together. If you wrote it on either one of these three things, it's going to be kosher. Now, what are we talking about? Kosvamai. What is this price referring to? Ilan and mezuzah. If it's referring to mezuzah, it can't be because mezuzah aklaf mikasvina. We already made it very clear that the mezuzah can only be written on the d'chsustus, not on the klaf. Elalav tefillin, it must be referring to tefillin. And tefillin, you see from here, can be written both on the klaf and on the d'chsustus, and even on the gvil. In fact, tomorrow the tameich tefillin agvil mitkasvina. Can you write tefillin on gvil? Everybody holds you wouldn't be able to write tefillin on gvil. This brisa must be talking about a Sefer Torah, and a Sefer Torah can be written either on the cloth, the dechsustus, or the gvil. So let's still bring a raya from someone else to Rav that you could write tefillin on the dechsustus. Kayotze boy, we learned tefillin shabalu, the Sefer Torah shabalu. What if tefillin were worn out and you had a Sefer Torah that was worn out? Ein oishin men mezuzah. You're not allowed to make a mezuzah out of it. Levisha ein maridin miktusha chamur l'ktusha kala. Tefillin are more holy than mezuzah. Sefer Torah is more holy than mezuzah. You're not allowed to repurpose something that's more holy and make it do something that's less holy. Time of day maridin. So the only thing that's stopping us from using tefillin for a mezuzah is because it's lowering the kedusha. Hamaridin. But if that wouldn't be a problem, oishin, you would be able to. Well, let's think about it. How is that possible? Diksiva amai. What were these tefillin written upon? Lav diksiva adechsustus. Wasn't the tefillin written on a dechsustus? If it was written on a dechsustus, it's possible. It's written on the cloth. But the problem is, if it's written on the cloth, we already said in mezuzah you cannot write on the cloth. Mezuzah cloth mikas vinen. Can you write mezuzah on cloth? So in. As a matter of fact, until now we were saying you can never write mezuzah on the cloth. You can only write it on the dechsustus. I'm going to bring you a raya that you can even write mezuzah on the cloth. But Tanya, we learned kos ala cloth ala niyar v'lamatas psulo. But Amar B'Shem ben Elazar, Reb Meir ayikosh v'ala cloth. Reb Meir used to write his mezuzahs even on cloth. Because cloth holds out. It's a strong, durable fabric. Now that we reach this point that a mezuzah could be written on cloth, then you'll say Rav Nami loitem dechsustus harei cloth. Don't say dechsustus is like cloth, which would indicate that something that needs cloth, like tefillin, you can also write on dechsustus. Elaimo cloth harei dechsustus. Say cloth is like dechsustus, meaning a mezuzah can also be written upon cloth. Ma dechsustus kaifs in the law of mezuzah, of cloth kaifs in the law of mezuzah. So Allah L'mais in Rav, you can write a mezuzah on dechsustus and cloth. You can write a tefillin on cloth, and you can write a Sefer Torah on cloth. And nowadays we use cloth for all three applications. I went over, so I apologize. 8:30 is Hallel.
8:30.
So let's dive in and let's go straight to Hallel.
Chaim Tzvi, did you daven already? Chaim Tzvi, did you daven?
No, I did not.